Hi everybody, Beth here from Access Paranormal for the second session for today with PIVC2020. I am joined by none other than John Fraser. So a couple of things before we get stuck into it. We are at the mercy of the internet, so if it does drop out in any way, shape or form, it might be a bit glitchy here and there. I do apologise. There might be even a bit of an audio lag or audio delay. Again, apologies for that as well. So we're doing what we can with what we've got. We've got people coming in. Robert's already in there. Hi, Robert. Good to see you, lovely man. We've got Julie as well and Kyla. Also, obviously, if we're going to have questions partway through the last session, type a Q and then write the question. And if you have a comment for John, type in C and have the comment. So that makes it easier for me to actually jump in and keep a track of questions, because I want to be able to keep as many of them there for John. I know this is going to be a really good presentation and it's going to stir a lot of good questions as well. So I do highly encourage that, but that's the best way to do it. So if you can do that, Q for question, C for comment. Oh, hi, Ursula. Oh, lovely. Ursula's watching as well. Fantastic. So a little bit about this man, if you haven't been living under a rock. John Fraser is a member of the Council of the Society of Psychical Research and has been a vice chair in investigations of the Ghost Club, the two oldest groups in the country, of course, that study on this particular subject. Now, his topics of study have been as varied as hypnotic regression and vampire folklore, as well as more conventional paranormal research. John's active interest in the paranormal dates from the 1980s, when he participated in a long-running series of hypnotic regression experiments, assisting in the coordination of sessions and being trained in hypnotic regression techniques. As well as many such experiments, despite some impressive results, he found it was inconclusive. In 2010, Ghost Hunting, A Survivor's Guide was one of the first UK books published about the subject, once it was repopularised back in TV with all the new shows. In 2015, John worked on an extended project of witness testimony regarding the well-publicised phenomena occurring at the Cage in Essex, also assessing the validity of the witness testimony in spontaneous paranormal cases. As today, he explores the topic of poltergeists and if they were in fact rare as they appear to be. So it's over to John.
Well, hello everybody. Hello everyone in UK and in USA and Australia. First of all, I was rather hoping that Beth would only take bits out of that CV, because it's rather giving away my age. Though I do kind of feel that this feels a little bit like Live Aid, people from all over the world getting together. And a quick plug for the NHS charities that I think Beth has posted on the internet. If you do have the funds to contribute, please do so. I've done my little bit, like Bob Geldof and Live Aid, without the swearing. But I'm not going to do Phil Collins and fly over to America to do the evening set, you'll be pleased to know. But that is, and for those that are a little bit too young to know about Live Aid, do Google it later, because that'll be all over your head. Now, what I want to do today is do a presentation for about half an hour, of which the subject is our poltergeist rare. That's the short topic. As you'll see in a second, it's got a punchline. And then leave plenty of time for questions. So I'm going to ask Beth to make my face disappear and tell me when the slideshow is up. Thank you, Beth.
Alrighty. There we go. The slideshow is up and raring to go. Over to you.
All right. Now, the full title of this talk is Our Poltergeist Rare, or is the intermediate case the poltergeist elephant in the room? I always like having long titles that don't really tell you what it's about until the end. But let's start by trying to define what a poltergeist is. Now, according to Harry Price, the legendary paranormal researcher, who you might hear quite a lot about in the next half hour, it's an alleged ghost elemental entity agency, secondary personality, spirit, imp and familiar, thievish, spiteful, resourceful, vampiric. Harry Price did love using a lot of words, but even the more common definition of a poltergeist is interesting. A spirit believed to manifest itself in presence by rappings and other noises, and also by acts of mischief. Quite an impressive entity indeed. But definitions aside, how does the poltergeist present itself in the real world? Let's look at the really famous Enfield poltergeist case in 1977, where amongst many other things, marbles flew through the air and landed without rolling. Doors and drawers opened of their own accord. Objects such as teaspoons, a cardboard box, and even a fish tank lid jumped in the air. Pity those poor fish. Raps and bangs were made in a way that showed intelligence. Going further afield, again a well-documented case, that of the Black Monk of Pontefract, again taking place in the council house, which had stronger phenomena, which included a grandfather clock being pushed down the stairs along with a young girl, 13-year-old Diane Pritchard, being dragged up the same set of stairs by her hair. Now here, a shadowy figure was identified as a monk, more than likely because the small town of Pontefract was famous for having 3 ecclesiastical centres in the past, but none near to this council house. So despite the name of the case, a poltergeist monk was apparently an unlikely candidate. More recent events in the UK still, the Cage St Joseph's, which used to be a lock-up cell, now a private dwelling, which in the early 2000s had lots of incidents, including 5 examples of possible poltergeist scratchings, of which this is one. Poltergeist scratchings being when blemishes suddenly appear on the skin. Now, with such a variety and depth of phenomena, it kind of sounds to me like the poltergeist can and should play the lead role in any serious paranormal investigation. I mean, let's face it, it certainly does in the average horror movie. But strangely, the opposite seems to be the case. Nearly all our time is spent in investigating traditional ghosts. But why has that become such a trend? Now, my colleague in the Society for Psychical Research has noted in the PSI Encyclopedia that poltergeist activity is very rare and often only lasts a few days and weeks. And that, to be fair, is most people's perception. Real life cases, such as the Enfield case or the Black Monk, are like winning the paranormal national lottery jackpot. They just don't normally happen. But is that rareness really the case? Now that was, I thought, a question that needed to be answered on any good book on the subject. Because despite the current liking for modern council houses, a history of the poltergeist seems to go as far back as a ghost. There are cases throughout history, such as the Tedworth drummer, 1661 UK, and the Bell Witch poltergeist in Tennessee, which was certainly more poltergeist than witch, with, as you see there, the phenomena consisting of knocking and scratchings, throwing of stones, and speaking of sounds at a nerve-wracking pitch. We might come back to this later, so remember this description. But the question is, do recent events reflect this rich and colourful history? Now, the first way I set out to discover this was through some research in my own local archives. The logical thing being that if poltergeists can be found in the rather bland suburb of Croydon, which is just outside London and which is where I live, they can be quite frankly found literally anywhere. And in doing so, I actually found a very famous case just across the street from where I live. The famous at the time, but now largely forgotten, Thornton Heath poltergeist, based in Croydon, which was renowned for near crushing a newspaper reporter by a falling wardrobe. That's the extract from my local newspaper, and which justified a whole book from the well-known investigator Nando Fodor, and a brief visit, of course, from Harry Price, who was never one to be left out. Now, barely a mile down the road, there's another famous case, that of the sadly demolished King Sellers Bar, which was investigated by the author Colin Wilson and featured quite a lot in his book on poltergeist in the 1980s, and which consisted of glasses and bottles flying off the bar and a cash register operating without any human hand, normally coming up with a price tag of £999. Quite a bar bill. Now, this was supposedly triggered by the suicide of a young lady who threw herself off the nearby Nestle Tower just to the left of that picture. But again, there's little documented evidence of that, which shows that this poltergeist is about as likely to be a suicide as the Pontefract one has of being a monk. Another quick case found in the annals of the SPR Journal, just to show that Croydon has its fair share. But I fully admit, local cases are just anecdotal and insufficient to prove my point of the poltergeist popularity. So next, I tried a different angle and looked to previous efforts to categorize poltergeists, especially in relation to ghosts. Now, easily the best example here is in the work of SPR researchers Gauld and Cornell in their book on poltergeists, called Poltergeists, and published in 1979. The interesting thing here is that Gauld and Cornell found a significant overlap of ghost and poltergeist phenomena in an exhaustive study involving over 500 cases through history, finding that 29% of poltergeist cases included visible ghost-like phenomena, while 26% included audible human-sounding ghostly voices. Examples of where ghosts and poltergeists seem for some reason to mix the phenomena. And Gauld and Cornell thought this cases to be special and gave it the term intermediate cases. However, our intermediate cases separate are one and the same phenomena. Because if poltergeist phenomena is far rarer than traditional hauntings, you'd surely expect to see many examples of well-authenticated ghosts not involving a poltergeist. And in the UK, with an estimated 1,200 ghost hunting groups in 2006, I kind of thought they must have plenty of ghosts to investigate. I'm sure there's far more in the USA and quite a few in Australia as well. But are there really that many traditional hauntings? After all, more recent research has largely become about spending the night in an old creepy house, looking for small changes in temperature, EMF readings, or seeing something from the corner of your eye. And, you know, I kind of think if you do see something strange in the shadows at 4 a.m. when short of sleep and likely pumped up with caffeine drinks, what does it actually prove? The strange supernatural power, or, if you'll forgive my light-hearted theory, possibly the strange powers of a second can of Red Bull. Now, this style of investigation has been encouraged by various popular TV series, from Ghost Hunters with Jason Hawes and Grant Wilson to Jack Bagans' Ghost Adventurers, and in the UK, Most Haunted with Yvette Fielding and with controversial guest appearances by Creed Caffer and Rick Edels. Or even more recently, Help, My House is Haunted. Now, each title seems to be trying to outdo the other and making their names and locations even scarier. Now, some might just say that's an inevitable feature of modern reality TV. But putting a romantic spin on a good ghost story in the name of research, I'd say is something that goes back at least half a century. Now, in the UK at least, perhaps the first modern way to categorize hauntings was that of Peter Underwood's book, A Gazetteer of British Ghosts, published in 1971. And I think of this book as giving a good cross-section of hauntings in the UK as any. I'm sure there's been similar in Australia and the US as well. Now, the interesting thing about this book is even though Peter Underwood is very respected, member of the SPR and the Ghost Club, that whilst some of the cases were very well researched, others were just based on folklore, wonderful to read, but tales likely unfounded in fact. Such tales include the children in starving rags seen outside. It couldn't be inside because there isn't much inside left of the Bramber Castle in Sussex. Always apparently, of course, at Christmas time. After all, we all like a good Christmas story in the form of M.R. James ghost stories. Now, other tales in this factual book include blood-curdling ones, such as the one of the poor ill-fated Dame Dorothy Selby, who was bricked up by her fellow Catholics in her own home of Igtham Moot in Kent for betraying the gunpowder plot in 1605. However, the inconvenient problem with this story is that Selby's mausoleum and burial place is in the nearby church of St. Peter's in Igtham, and showing that she didn't die until 40 years later, which is clearly marked in her headstone, and making this a ghost story that simply couldn't exist. Now, whilst, as I said, I have every respect for Underwood, by including uncorroborated or poorly corroborated folklore in his book of factual ghosts, he rather started a trend to mix up folklore with more recent, better authenticated cases. trends which other authors and many of these modern TV programs have simply continued. And these trends, I think, may overstate the true numbers of non-poltergeist traditional hauntings. Now, where it starts to get really interesting is that most of the better research type of case in Underwood's book seems to be Gauld and Cornell's intermediate type. An example being of the Kenton Theatre, Henley and Thames, when in 1969 the play The Hanging Wood was produced there, based on a story of a local girl, Mary Blandy, who was hanged in 1752 for poisoning her father. Now, as soon as the rehearsals began, incidents took place. A large mirror jumped off the wall. Lights were switched on and off. Doors mysteriously opened and closed. But a figure of a girl was reported in the back of the theatre as well. Now, this happened only 2 years before Underwood's book was published, so I think we'd agree is likely to be accurate and includes elements of hauntings, such as apparitions and those of poltergeists rolled into one. Another case in the book, never missed in a good ghost book, that of Borley Rectory, a case brought to fame by our old friend Harry Price, but which has witness statements from Victorian times to the present day, showing visual phenomena such as a phantom nun in the garden, but also bricks and stones better suited for a poltergeist. Is good an example of an intermediate case as he could possibly want. So my point is that once you've taken away all the whimsical romantic cases and those Red Bull fueled fleeting glimpses, it seems that what you're left with is the intermediate case, with the intriguing possibility that it's not intermediate at all, that ghosts and poltergeists are just ways of expressing different aspects of the same phenomena. But if traditional hauntings are actually rare or even non-existent, it doesn't by itself mean that poltergeists are common. In fact, if you look at the famous cases, they seem to be Western European, North American, and possibly Australian, the English-speaking world. But could it not be a possibility that other cultures, that in other cultures, poltergeist cases are simply misreported? That there's a tendency for people to report things in their own familiar folklore and terms. We've already seen the Pontefract case became a black monk because it suited the area's history. But let's look at some stranger ways the poltergeist might express itself. Take, for example, the Duande, better known to us as a goblin. Now, this storybook beast has been the bogeyman of many parts of Latin America, except that this mischievous Duande are reported as having familiar poltergeist habits of throwing things around. But because of the lack of common terminology, fall outside our radar of serious research. I mean, let's admit it. Which of you in the paranormal community would admit to going goblin hunting? But there's numerous cases. Such a case was researched by my colleague Alan Murdy, Poyan, Colombia, 1837, in a home of a Dr. Espina. Stones and pebbles fell from the sky. The source of the missiles couldn't be traced, but Espina, suspecting his neighbours, got the family arrested. The stones continued. He brought in the National Guard to keep watch. The source of the stones couldn't be identified and were blamed on the Duande. But there are very great similarities between this case and the case of mysterious stone throwings in Brazil, investigated by the famous paranormal researcher Guy Playfair, which, because of his European background, was recorded as poltergeist once. Now, if you think the Duande is strange, a little bit more familiar to us is the Strigoi of Romania, the Verkloklis of Greece, that multi-named entity in Slavic states of Eastern Europe, more familiarly termed of us in the West as a vampire, given its Gothic appearance by Bram Stoker in his novel Dracula, which helps make many of us assume that it's a totally fictitious beast, and based on that picture, thank goodness it is. However, Richard Sugg of Durham University has argued incidents reported as vampire ones in countries that accept the concept have a strange familiar ring. Noises, movements of objects, scaring of poor victims witless. Suggs refers to a case of a dead man named Andalivis, who in 1890 revisited his village in Greece, and amongst other things would amuse himself by smashing plates and glasses, clattering pots and pans, and howling. Audible sounds and poltergeist activity mixed as a perfect example of an intermediate case dressed up in vampire mythology, in the black cloak of vampire mythology. There's other cases as well. Jeff Holder, in his book What is a Poltergeist, dedicates a whole chapter to the possible vampire connection, but points out rather reassuringly that the Bulgarian shadow vampire might behave like a poltergeist, but were comparatively harmless and only able to play practical jokes. Now, I think the cultural difference here is that Western Europe Catholic countries regard incorruptible bodies, which vampires are, as being saints, so would not culturally put the paranormal in such terms, while the Eastern Christian Orthodox Church regards incorruptibles as being demonic. So what better terminology to use to describe a frightening poltergeist incident? So once the cultural concepts are unravelled, poltergeist seems to be well travelled around the world. Now, Price, again, was ridiculed for investigating an entity that was identified as a talking mongoose. That played pranks on Vary Irving, a 13-year-old girl in a cottage in Cashin's Gap, Isle of Man. That's the site of the cottage there. Now, in the context of poltergeist goblins and poltergeist vampires, it strikes me that Price was unfairly castigated. A poltergeist mongoose starts to seem feasible and possibly mundane. But let's look more closely at the poltergeist mongoose. Key factors in the haunting of Cashin's Gap: stone throwing, banging, a voice coming from nowhere, and a girl, Vary Irving, about to enter her teens. Let's go back to that famous Bell Witch. Phenomena around 12-year-old child Betsy Bell, knockings and scratchings, and speaking sounds at a nerve-wracking pitch. You've got a virtual clone of two cases, but described in totally different ways, neither of which involves the poltergeist. So I asked the question, is the poltergeist rare once misdiagnosed cases have been added? And now, if that wasn't enough to convince, it might be possible that cases are not reported at all. There's incidents that everyone experiences where a valued object has simply disappeared to be found again, either put back in the same place or somewhere else where it would have been inconceivable to put it. Now, most of us, when that happens, just shrug our shoulders and say it was just one of those things. But is it not also one of those things which is very common in the start of poltergeist cases. So it might be possible that low-level poltergeist activity is happening around us and just gets shrugged off. Now, a colleague of mine who sadly died a couple of months ago, Mary Rose Barrington, was a stalwart of this theory. She actually joined the SPR in 1957 and was in its council in 1962. She categorized this phenomena as just one of those things and using the terminology of jots, it being a literal abbreviation for just one of those things, or as Barrington puts it, inexplicable happenings that are brushed aside as false perceptions, failures of observations of things that could not happen and therefore did not happen and are best forgotten. Now, she categorizes various types of jots, but the ones that are of particular interest to us are the comeback jot, where an object disappears and comes back in the same place, and the walkabout jot, where an object reappears in a different place, because both are key factors in many poltergeist cases. Now, I mentioned earlier the cage of St. Joseph's, and there were various instances here of walkabout jots, particularly by one of the cousins of the owner, who used to come round to tidy when the owner and the lodgers were at work, and was therefore the only living entity in the building. While she was there, she found various things happened, such as cushions magically being rearranged, books being stacked in a corner, and items of clothes disappearing and found in very different places. So, if jots are common in poltergeist cases, and jots are inexplicable, or possibly inexplicable in everyday life, is everyday life just not one big poltergeist adventure? Perhaps then it's a time to change the way we try to investigate and prove the paranormal. Are we using too much equipment to try and detect small changes that may or may not have meaning? And in doing so, are we missing what I'd call the poltergeist elephant in the room? Now, why is this elephant so important? Now, I think it's important because it's a phenomena on the poltergeist spectrum that could turn out to be provable. Most evidence of ghosts are either romantic whimsy or have alternative, plausible psychological explanations that are far more persuasive than my light-hearted Red Bull theory. Now, they briefly include confirmation bias, interpretation of evidence as confirmation of one's existing beliefs, to top-down processing, picking up false perceptions in the brain's search for meaning, a passing shadow appearing to the brain as a dark hooded monk. Even more basically, it includes the psychology of being spooked in an old creepy building. The psychologist Bentel puts it better than me. I'll let you read that one. Now, bear in mind that such an experience actually happened en masse in an investigation I conducted in the Clerkenwell House of Detention, an underground remains of a Victorian remand prison, but also a chamber of horrors. Quite a place to spend the night in the dark, and a place where my investigators' reports suddenly became purely subjective, with even non-psychic, hard-headed civil servants writing down such things as choruses of discordant voices appearing in his heads, shouting, screaming, pleading, crying, and begging. So when it comes to ghost-type phenomena, when so much of evidence is of this type, it makes it perfectly possible that even if you think that apparitions and ghosts may paranormally exist, that by their very nature, their evidence may always be ambiguous and impossible to prove. But when it comes to the poltergeist, if a gas fire is lifted out of his fittings, it happened at Enfield, or objects thrown around the room, such efforts as a psychological explanation become, quite frankly, absurd, and you get a fact or fraud scenario. Either somebody tricked or something paranormally strange happened, and you're in a position to test that. I can't see ghosts ever proving paranormal cases, but I can see the poltergeist proving them. Now this, of course, I admit, is a working hypothesis, and it may be up for debate as to whether poltergeist phenomena are common or rare or possibly non-existent. What I don't think is up for debate is, for all the reasons I've given, poltergeists at least have the potential to be fairly common, and it's only research and debate on their cause that are currently inexplicable and far too rare. So, all I'm asking in this presentation, and coincidentally in this book, is to push this debate forward. Now, to do more needs the input of interested researchers, and hopefully there's a few of you listening today. So where do we come from here? Of course, there are some good books in the subject which you may or may not want to purchase, and it's absolutely not up for me to tell you which. But if you're interested, I do have a few advanced copies for the UK audience, and if you are interested, do copy down that email, jfraserghosthunting@hotmail.co.uk. But other than this, how we advance what I think is a very neglected area is really up to you. So I'll go silent and hope that you've got a few questions about this. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. That's fantastic. Great presentation. I'm really glad that we had the chance to be able to have this as part of PIVC2020. There's some fantastic points that you've raised, really good information, and it is the paranormal. It's not just, we think it's this, it's that. Like, you just bring up so many different and unique viewpoints on what possible, what poltergeist activity can possibly be, and how it's been described over the years as well. It's fascinating. Oh goodness, the chat room's going crazy. Oh, there's a question. Wonderful. So this is a rather long one, so I don't know how it's going to display. Oh goodness. Okay.
Hi, Kerry, by the way.
Hi, Kerry. Do you think all hauntings could display poltergeist behaviour only limited by the amount of accessible energy that the haunt has access to? For example, a teenager's energy contributing to poltergeist-type behaviour in some cases, tourism being the contributing factor in others, and a revival of belief due to religion and TV in others? That's a big question.
It's a big question, actually. I'm tempted to say she'd read my book, but I haven't sent her an advance copy, so I don't think I have. No, I think Kerry actually hits a nail. Can you put up the question again, please?
Oh yes, yeah, okay.
Because it had a few facets. I think she hits the nail on the head. Now, poltergeist, whatever a poltergeist is, it seems to feed an energy. There is a theory that it's teenage children. I think that's possibly just one source. It's traumatic events seem to trigger things off. There's a predominance. One of the cases I mentioned actually had a recent suicide in the past, and a house move and various slightly less traumatic, but still traumatic to the pair of people events seem to trigger that off as well. Also, something that strangely seems to trigger it off is the Suggs, if you remember, Suggs also mentioned that he thought that, in effect, the local peasants in Romania could, in effect, create poltergeist phenomena through their fear of vampires. And I tend to think in these ghost touristic places, the fear factor could create the enemy as well, the energy as well. So I think I would answer yes to your question, Kerry. I think you probably hit the nail on the head.
Wonderful. Thank you for that. Just having a quick look now through the chat room here. Let's have a look. Lots of great comments. People said it was really interesting. Thank you. Food for thought. Very interesting. Yes, thank you. Wonderful.
Do people know what Red Bull is? It is in Australia and America, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, good. You got my lame joke then. Okay, good.
No, it was funny. And it's interesting that, as you would obviously be aware, there has been some research into obviously sugar levels and junk food, what people eat while they're out, investigating at night, and how that affects what experiences people have as well. That's quite interesting. Now we've got a question from CJ here. Could it be that the apparition reflects the dead appearing, but the physical activity in psychokinesis caused by the investigator's own psychic powers manifesting, uncontrolled, enabled by being described to the ghost? Described to the ghosts. So the energy is human, not spook.
Probably. Hi, CJ. By the way, I think I sent you a copy, so I think you've read it. Oh dear. So yes, it could be, for sure. I speculate that it isn't, but I only speculate. Now, it was also a theory that Guy Lyon Playfair, who wrote the book The Enfield Case, at least at times subscribed to, where I don't think the theory is a perfect fit is that poltergeist, I always describe as a poltergeist as the least favourite person you'd want to take to a pub to, not because you'd throw things around, because most poltergeist phenomena is very mundane and boring. The poltergeist is the equivalent of the pub brewer. It might throw lots of things around, but based on communication saying anything of any meaning, it's very, very, very basic. Case in Andover where the poltergeist through knockings predicted the football results and it didn't even get that right. Now, I kind of think if it was an afterlife entity, it would want to kind of communicate in a more meaningful way. Now, that's not to say it's not an afterlife entity, but that's kind of explains why it's not my favourite theory. But there's others that would disagree, and that's something we can definitely have a debate about.
Wonderful. Good question. Another one from Kyla. Is there a place with most poltergeist activity you've had experienced? So is there a location that you felt that
I'm probably, hi Kyla, I'm probably more a researcher than I did used to spend lots of time in haunted sites. I'm not psychic. Probably the best I've had is the fire escape door of a haunted aircraft museum at RAF Cosworth, possibly opening of its own accord when I was on the haunted aeroplane. No, but that's about it. So I have to satisfy myself with testimony of others, and look for repeated testimonies to show that they have credibility. Sadly, I'm not. I don't have any huge poltergeist experiences to tell you about personally, but I hope I do have in the future.
Very good. Another one from someone else as well. Do you think people don't report activity because they are not sure who to report or how to report, or they don't do out of embarrassment?
that's a good question. I think people do actually report it, but to some extent, but I think a lot of groups don't know quite what to do with it. Now, this is actually an important question, because there's obviously the ethical aspect of investigating a poltergeist, because most traditional haunted locations are publicly accessible, old pubs, old castles, and so on. Most poltergeist cases happen ongoing in people's homes, not all of them, but most of them. So that might be one of the reasons that they're overlooked, and rightly so, if you're not properly equipped for tackling it in a sensitive way. So in some ways, before exploring the poltergeist, we all have to ask ourselves, have we had the training? Obviously a balance of male and female teams, and obviously don't go in with your own pet demonology theory, because that would just scare people and probably make things worse. I suspect, other than that, though, you are right. It's whilst a lot of these haunted sites are haunted by reputation, some are still haunted. Actual poltergeist case, a lot of people would just keep to themselves, and with all the other provisos, a lot of people just don't know how to handle them, and rightfully don't handle them for that reason. But my point is, even though it might be tricky, if we're going to try and prove the paranormal or some aspects of it, we have to look at these aspects.
Great, absolutely, 100%. We've got a question here from Andy Baxter. Hi, Andy. Hope you're well. What is the most unusual sound from a poltergeist you have researched, and why?
I would the cage intrusives had a lot of growling noises witnessed by different people who didn't know each other in separate incidents. I suspect that's one of the most unusual modern ones, although the talking mongoose singing is probably the most unique one.
Wow.
It depends on your taste to some extent, really.
True, and I think maybe your background as well. I think that would probably alter whatever it is that you would hear too, I would imagine. Or filter, your personal filter. All right, we have another question. Do you think there will be a jump in poltergeist cases during the lockdown with people in a house for longer and added stress?
Quite possibly, yes. Although they won't necessarily be reported, and even if they were reported, they couldn't be investigated. Not without not without claiming it to be an urgent medical need, which I think, even with the best will in the world, it isn't. So I suspect there would be, based on most theories of poltergeists, but I'm not sure if we'd ever find out if there was. That would be an interesting one to try and follow up on. I like that question. Just out of curiosity, these Facebook users, are they deliberately anonymous, or is it just the way they're coming through in the system?
It's the way they're coming through the system. It's the way.
If you want to email me that afterwards, I actually like that question. I'd be quite interested in who asked it. If you, it's John J Fraser ghost hunting at hotmail.co.uk. Maybe we can put it up at the end or something.
Yes.
Yeah.
Wonderful. I actually had a question for you, because I thought I might as well just jump in myself. What is your favourite poltergeist case?
Oh, that's a good question. My favourite poltergeist case would probably, simply because it's the one I've been most involved with, be the one I briefly mentioned, the cage in St. Joseph's, just because I found it so... I basically managed to devise a project where I spent a little bit of time at the cage, but most of my time was actually spent in a caravan nearby with a colleague of mine, Rosie O'Carroll, interviewing all the key people involved in the case, and then tracking down the key people who didn't live nearby and interviewing them by phone and internet to try and jigsaw the whole thing together. And I actually found there was quite an overlap of phenomena by people that didn't actually know each other, and actually putting that jigsaw together was actually a really interesting thing in itself. So that, for personal reasons, would be my personal poltergeist case. It also had the nice aspect of a witch. The background was that it may or may not have been caused by a witch who may or may not have been imprisoned there, but that might give it an interesting historical twist. So that would be my favourite case, and but other people would have others for different reasons, I'm sure.
Of course. Now, Mel has said, Poltergeists is your newest book. How many paranormal books have you written?
2, Mel. Hi, Mel. 2 is the easy answer. I'm a researcher that happens to be an author sometimes, rather than an author who is a researcher sometimes. Last one's about 8 years ago, and it was called Ghost Hunting: A Survivor's Guide. I suppose it couldn't be too bad a book because I'm still here and I survived. But just two for now. The Poltergeist one is on Amazon pre-order, but it doesn't come out until mid to late July. As I say, if you were based in the UK, you can email me. But otherwise, it's just a couple of months wait if you were interested, and I hope you are.
And she is, because I ran a competition and there was a book prize, and one of them was your book. So Mel was actually one of the winners of that, and so she already has one coming to her from July onwards. So there you go.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Nice one. I didn't get a chance to enter. I'd have had all the answers.
Oh, right. Now, there's another great question here. Do you think because so many different groups go into investigations with a fixed theory beforehand, it makes legitimate and a verifiable documentation impossible, and is making the paranormal field look like a mess from the general public on science?
Yes and no. It doesn't help to go in with an absolute. I mean, everyone's got their slight belief syndromes. I'm actually a light touch skeptic, but I try not to let that interfere when 5 people are telling me a chest of drawers got thrown across the room in front of them. You know, I mean, it's mind blowing. So I'm a very open minded skeptic. But if you go in with a fixed theory and let it affect the way you investigate, it does hinder. It doesn't make documentation impossible, in that if you do get an objective, real live event happening and record it properly, it is still worthy of a follow-up. But it does make the ghostly stuff a little bit more open to interpretation, if you know what I mean, for sure. But certainly, if somebody recorded a what appeared to be a genuine poltergeist event, I'd obviously be looking, as anyone should, for trickery and what have you. But their belief pattern would become kind of irrelevant.
Absolutely. Another great question here. What are your thoughts on RSPK?
I think RSPK is more likely to have a lot in common with poltergeist activity, except it would be the controlled use of its power. And if you think about the Matthew Manning case, he briefly started off having lots of poltergeist incidents in his house and school. when he was young. He was nearly expelled from school for that reason, believe it or not. And now he's become a fairly world-famous medium. So taking his case at face value, he started having uncontrolled phenomena, which he later managed to control. So I think the two are very closely connected.
Absolutely. Got another great question. The Philip experiment managed to generate a ghost supposedly. Has something similar been done to produce a poltergeist?
Yes, I would actually argue that the Philip experiment started off trying to generate a ghost, but they actually created a poltergeist. If you actually look at most of the stuff that happened in the Philip experiment, it was tables turning over and moving and mainly stuff like that. I mean, the ghostly part, the identity of the ghost, they actually deliberately invented, if I remember my facts. Like coincidentally, it was actually the same guy that did this, that investigated Matthew Manning case. The two are kind of interestingly connected. But I would actually say that they ended up creating more a poltergeist than the ghost. I can't remember there being many sightings of Philip. He just made a lot of noise and did just about everything other than predict the football results, but a Cavalier wouldn't. But tell me if I'm wrong, somebody, because I'm doing that from memory.
Wow, gosh, that'd be cool. I have a question myself for you. For anyone who wants to investigate a poltergeist case, what advice would you give them for the best way to do that?
Ooh, join a reputable society or group that has been going for a good few years and doesn't work on any belief syndrome and has a good code of ethics. It's not a DIY project, unless there just happens to be a public building that has poltergeist entities and so on. There are one or two, and I mean the earlier question, can ghost tourism create ghost entities? There are one or two places in the UK. Believe it or not, Pontefract is currently let out for investigations, and as nobody lives there, is comparatively harmless, as was the cage, but it's no longer the case. But if you're going to investigate a spontaneous case that is happening in a family, don't do it without taking a lot of knowing what you're doing, basically, because there's, in that case, it's not the research that comes first, it's people being scared witless.
Very true. There's a comment just from Nigel. Nigel was also the person that had the comment about that you wanted to email. So it was this particular individual, Nigel. Facebook was a great source for stories using local sites. Just ask, we could use it in an organised way. The lockdown question was mine. Good idea. So he will email you.
Yeah, no, I quite like that. Yeah, we should try and post it around. I mean, maybe I'm trying to think what groups would be better. Yeah, just ask probably. Yeah, because ghost hunting groups would get the ghost hunting clientele, if you like. But what we were interested in is just finding out. Well, we'd have to make it very clear that we're not really in a position to assist at the moment.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
I mean, literally.
I mean, I know there are people that claim to remote view and clear spirit from another location. So I imagine business would still be booming for them.
Yep.
For us that don't have that. Yeah. Another comment from Nigel himself involved rats and table lifting. They did not what sightings experiment for PSK only.
I think Nigel's referring to the Philip experiment, and he said involved naps and table lifting. Yeah, that's if he is, that's what I was remembering correctly. They did not. What sightings? I don't know. I don't think they saw anything. I think they were planning out to try to see things. They were actually trying to create a ghost, but they just got a poltergeist instead. You know, I mean, what a disappointment.
Yeah, I've always said if there was one around where I lived, it would be most welcome to do the vacuuming if it can move objects, because I wouldn't want to have to keep doing that once a week. That would be my kind of poltergeist. All right. Yes, so there we go. Yes, it was the Philip experiment that he was talking about. Fantastic. Thanks for the clarification, Nigel. I think we've just hit our hour. So,
we have.
Oh my gosh, time flies when you're having fun. This is great.
It's 12 o'clock. If it was the other 12 o'clock, it would be the witching hour, but it isn't.
It will be. It's the opposite witching hour. Yeah. All right, everybody. Thank you so much for joining in. And John, a very big, heartfelt thank you for coming on board. Oh, no, we've got one more. CJ's got one more in there. What have we got? Quickly jump in. Groups in lockdown could try to recreate the Bachelor Owen experiments. Oh, very true.
Good. It would involve actually living with a group of ghost hunters. I'm not sure. Most of us, our other half, think we're a bit batty and stuff like that. So but if you do happen to live with a group of paranormal investigators, ghost hunters, that would be a good way of spending the time. Actually, CJ, yeah, definitely. But anyway, I'd just like to thank you for giving me my half hour on here and do my Bob Geldof thing again and say if you've got the money, give to the good charities, and good luck to you all and stay safe.
Oh, thank you so much, John. Thank you everybody for watching. Obviously next session is going to be in half an hour. Do take care. Thanks again, John, so much for sharing your knowledge. And again, guys, contribute what you can to these wonderful charities that are at the front line for COVID-19. Thanks again, everyone.